Rain against glass used to calm me. Tonight it doesn't. It presses in, insistently, tapping like fingers that want me to move faster. The window pane is bare, no curtain, only a flat black screen of night looking back. When I was younger, that blackness felt like safety. A barrier. I'd sit close to the radio, dial loose in my hand, waiting for the voice that made shadows less heavy. Art Bell filled the air then. Half comfort, half warning. He was a stranger, yet his tone slid into the silence of the house, as if it belonged there. I was 14 when I caught the first late broadcast. Sleepless, fumbling with a hand-me-down radio my brother swore was broken. The tuning knob drifted too easily, the scale misaligned. But through static and drift, the voice came through, calm, patient, curious, never laughing at the extraordinary. That night I felt less alone. The world was strange. Art made it survivable. I thought I carried only the memory of those nights. Until tonight, when the hum crept back into this room, reminding me the black screen was never just empty. The rain sharpens. It doesn't scatter, it sinks. A rhythm brushes the glass 3 steady taps, pause, 3 again. At first, I try to dismiss it. Rain finds patterns sometimes. But when the taps fold into a faint low hum beneath, my stomach tightens. I dig into the drawer, hands rattling through tangled cables, and pull out the recorder I haven't touched in years. Dust rasps off my fingers. I plug it in, power the screen. Blue light blooms small and harsh in the corner. The old radio's beside me, antennae crooked, waiting. I slide a cassette into the deck, one I labeled in dull pencil. 10/9/96. I remember the night. It was storming then too. Exactly this sound, rain tapping into voice, static braided with questions too big for the hour. I press play. The hiss splits like wet cloth tearing. Then his voice. Art. Clearer than I deserve after all these years. Warm, steady, patient. For a second I forget the unease. Until I hear what rides beneath, thinner than breath yet coiled, deliberate. A low-frequency shadow bleeding through the archive dot. My hand hovers close to the gain knob, afraid to touch it, afraid not to. Turning it risks amplifying something I can't dismiss. Leaving it risks losing it forever. I stare at the meter, a weak line twitching up and down, not in sync with Art's words. It shouldn't be there. If it were bleed, it would ride the same pace. This is different. A kind of coded murmur woven behind him. Once I notice it, I can't unhear it. Each sentence pulls a faint sigh, almost mathematical, too exact to feel random. The room is quiet otherwise, quieter than any night I can recall. Even the rain deadens as though listening in. My chair creaks when I shift, a crack too sharp under the hushed hum. I shake my head, force myself to breathe. Nostalgia is supposed to ease the weight of absence, but this doesn't welcome me back. It feels like invitation subtle, practiced, rehearsed long enough that I was meant to find it after years of forgetting. The air hums low, and my hands twitch a circle over the recorder's buttons, hovering like I need permission. I think of my brother. He'd sat with me at that radio more than once, teasing me about UFO callers, but staying longer than he'd admit. After he was gone, those tapes became more than noise. I carried them everywhere. His laughter caught faintly on one of them, ricocheting through time. I swore once I heard it bleed where it shouldn't, layered behind static. Nobody believed me. I stopped insisting. But tonight I remember. Clearer, sharper. And when Art's voice continues on tape, the undercurrent grows stronger, louder, not random burst. Intentional, meant to be seen. I lean closer, chest pressed against desk edge. The knob is slick, wet with my sweat. I inch it right, the hum blooming too bold to ignore. My heart stumbles. The line on the display locks steady, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The rhythm falls into step with rain against glass. I swear the window pane vibrates back at me, taut sheet, stretched thin. The black screen of night beyond no longer empties. It waits, for me or for something else I can't tell. Everything in me says shut it down. Instead, I pick up a pen dot. I draw the rhythm in my notebook, graphite biting paper. The lead smudges under my palm. I write again, trace it until the shape presses deeper than sound, like glyphs instead of pulses. I blink hard, lean back. My throat is dry. The tape continues with Art telling a caller he'll never mock their fear, his voice steady. But the hum claws into each word. I pause, rewind, play again. Same imprint, same invisible shadow crossing. I slam stop. The silence after rattles me more than his voice. Even stopped, I think I still hear it. I push the chair back, stand beside the open window. The rain has slowed, droplets spaced like a deliberate pattern rather than weather. I half expect to see lights across the neighborhood, radios humming awake in every house. But no, only black screen sky peeling down, houses asleep under it. Street lamp crooked, buzzing faint compared to the hush. Nothing else moves. No sound but the pulse inside me. I close the window, but the rhythm doesn't leave. It lingers in the desk, the cassette, the shadows behind my chest. Like it has chosen to stay. I slide the tape out and stare at the reels. My reflection in plastic warps, blurred in miniature. Nostalgia curdles into hunger. Not for comfort, but for proof. Proof that what I hear now isn't only mine. That others tuned late at night might have caught the faint signal calling through. I can't pretend it's chance. Coincidence breaks under repetition. The rhythm tapped glass first, then reeled me back here. The cassette sealed it. Tonight was chosen. The quiet room breathes like a lung. I decide, I need to trace this out. See if anyone else hears it. I sat cross-legged on the floor. Boxes of cassettes spread around me like an uncharted archive. Cardboard bent soft at the corners, ink smudged where I once thought labeling was optional. Most tapes had dates or half-legible notes. Only one sat plain. No ink, no numbers, just plastic dulled by time. I held it up to the lamp and tilted. Inside, the reels shimmered faint, but scars cut across the film, jagged lines like claw marks in magnetic coating. Something had happened to this tape. I couldn't recall when or how. That made it more dangerous than any I'd logged. The deck gave a small cough as I slid the cassette in. I wound it back. The reels spun, then stuttered. Distortion rattled down my arms, vibrating as though the motors themselves strained at the weight of memory. Dust motes lifted with the shift of air. The fan in the old receiver whined faintly, blowing a thin wave of warm breath across my skin. The smell was sharp and dry, like old wiring and burned dust. The rain outside hammered against the walls in uneven bursts, hard enough to feel in my chest. I pressed play. At first it was ordinary hiss, a bed of static crushed under weak signal. My shoulders loosened, disappointed. Until it happened. 3 measured pulses, then a pause. 3 again. Deliberate, steady, refusing to scatter like typical drift. Not a glitch. Not a skip. Structure. My hand twitched toward the notebook, but I forced myself to listen through its length. The repeat came back each minute, cycling like coded breath. I closed my eyes to confirm. Always the same spacing, the same restraint. This was not accident. This was insertion. I reached for another box, flipping an old tape with a clear date etched in, October 14th, 96. I cued both side by side, fingers clumsy on the controls. As Art's show unspooled from one deck, I traced the tape's timestamp. The pulse slipped through, but at intervals that didn't line up. Not part of the broadcast. Something layered itself in afterward. I turned the volume down quick, throat dry. Old stories about pirate signals came to mind, but none of those left such surgical marks. Static bleed doesn't repeat like a heartbeat. I replayed the section, straining for any variation. My lamp flickered when the pulse thickened, though the building wiring held steady. My hand shook as I jotted the rhythm in my notebook, graphite scratching harsh grooves. The rain slammed louder against the window. Water streaked down like it aimed for a countdown of its own. I sketched the beats over and over, pages wrinkling with trains of sequenced marks. The pencil broke once, splintering under clumsy pressure. I replaced it, but my handwriting faltered, drifting crooked, unmoored. I knew this wasn't ordinary interference. The warmth of the equipment grew cloying, white noise from the fan wrapping around me like a breath I couldn't swallow. Each pulse pressed closer into the small space. I shut my eyes, let it brush along the edge of my hearing. The rhythm felt like it had intention, like the way someone might knock if they wanted you to know it was them, not a stranger. 3, pause, 3. My hair prickled. I thought of it playing not in my room, but across hundreds of households, hidden under questions about aliens, hauntings, Cold War ghosts. Was it directed then, or now? I forced myself to test for feedback. Wiggled cables, shifted alignments, muted and unmuted channels with deliberate care. The pulse remained constant, unaffected. The shapes on the VU meter refused to waver. A line drew itself on the screen, repeating marks. My heart tripped. If it was environmental interference, it would fold, scatter, smear across the scale. This didn't. It held itself firm, like print stamped into film. The clock scraped past midnight before I realized I was still crouched there. I looked toward the windows, condensation fogging the corners, every street lamp drowned in rain. I sat back against the wall, notebook loose in my lap. My chest ached. The pencil marks stared back, crude but insistent. The signal wasn't accidental. It had been placed. It had been left for someone to find. And somehow tonight, I'd picked it from the heap. That was the reveal I couldn't let go. Because if something can ride deep enough under one broadcast, under one voice trusted by millions, how many others had been hiding for years? Shadows imprinted not for accident, but for attention. My pulse matched it now, unwilling, betrayed by my own body. I reached for my laptop, palms slick against its casing. I opened spectral analysis software, the kind hobbyists use but professionals scoff at. It didn't matter. What mattered was the shape it might reveal. I fed in the distorted playback, turned off the lights, let the graph crawl upward. At first it was only noise, barcodes of chaos across black. But the longer I watched, the more careful my gaze, the more a flower bent out of random noise. A bloom, faint, shaped like circles curling from a center. Too symmetrical for error. My entire body chilled, despite the warmth pressing from the old fan. I heard the rain answer with fresh syncopation, smacking glass with the same 3. Pause 3. My head dropped, dizzy. I knew I had gone too far for comfort. Because this wasn't a glitch. And if it was structure, it was made for someone. Whether by accident or design, I had answered its call. I leaned over my notebook, hands trembling, and forced myself to write it one more time. The graphite tore through paper this time. The page ripped out, the recorder clicked. The tape whined. The pulse repeated, steady as breath. I heard it then not as background, but as address. Not conspiracy, not coincidence. A message. Directed here. At me. The pulse stayed with me through the night, crawling under the edges of consciousness. I fed it into my laptop, running crude freeware meant for hobbyists, not hardened engineers. Cheap, stripped-down tools, spectrograms no better than toys in the right hands. Still, patterns leak through toys when the data insists. Colors smeared across black. A forest of noise where static grains bunch together, then scatter. And then, beyond the clutter, a shape began to recur. A petal unfurling in motion. A bloom. Not perfect, but enough that my breath caught. The pulse showed itself, not only as sound but as form. I leaned closer, nose almost at the screen. The bloom expanded with each cycle, base heavy at first, then curling higher into ranges we shouldn't detect without special sensors. Yet I heard it faintly, not imagined, pressing fine needles behind the ears. A tone buried in kilohertz, whispering sideways across what should be silence. I sat back, chewing my lip. This was wrong in its precision. Nature scatters at the edges. Interference behaves like dice rolls, inconsistent, forgetful. But here, the pulse disciplined itself, repeating as if guided by hand. The laptop's fan sighed. Warm air stroked against my wrist, sickly sweet with dust. My eyes burned from the glow. I hit save 3 times, worried the file might vanish if I blinked. My hand hovered above the phone, unsure who could bear this weight. One person surfaced anyway. An old friend, a sound tech who'd repaired more gear than most ever saw. He knew distortion like a mechanic knows engine whine. He'd know if I was chasing nothing. Without letting myself think further, I dialed. No answer. I left a message. I need your help with a signal. One that doesn't belong. His phone would stay quiet for hours, maybe more. Alone again, I slid into the online boards. Skeletal hangouts haunted by ham radio lifers. Threads buried years deep. I typed search words in half sentences. Conspiracies dressed as curiosity. Nets trawling dark water. Stories flickered up from near the turn of the century. Posters with usernames long since abandoned. They wrote of an artifact, always slipping in behind the smooth voice of coast to coast. A shimmer you couldn't tape clean. People called it the bell curve. Words laced with mockery and awe. Some said the curve mapped forgotten satellites that nobody claimed. Others swore it was military tests bleeding through. But a few wrote differently. They said it changed as you listened, as though recording your attention and folding it back through. Anyone searching too deep disappeared into silence, their post stranded mid-sentence. The threads were archived incomplete, mirroring exactly the fear we feel when a phone call ends before a voice finishes. I clicked through each fragment, pages stuttering as if uneager to show themselves. The more I read, the closer the pulse echoed behind me. Off-screened out my hand returned to the spectrogram window. The bloom still bent open, petal layers curling with that impossible symmetry. The lines drew up into slices of registers humans shouldn't hear. Yet I heard their edges biting. This wasn't glitch folklore. The bloom insisted itself. Documenters may have mocked the curve, framed it folklore. But nature doesn't build flowers out of static. The rain thickened then, rattling hard against the glass, outrunning the tick of the clock. My notebook lay open, half filled with graphite scratches. I felt foolish trying to shape the bloom in pencil, failed arcs crawling across the page. Yet the act of copying steadied my hands. I thought of the nameless posts, voices many years dropped into void. They had heard this. They weren't liars. They weren't mistaken. They wrote what they found, then vanished. The hum seemed to grow teeth close to that thought, sharper, raising the little hairs along my arms. It pressed from above, a ghost weight upon my shoulders. I exhaled slow, steadying myself. This was more than nostalgia drag. This was intrusion. Something purposeful enough to write flowers into sound, disciplined enough to keep its rhythm across decades. The longer I watched, the more certain it seemed the bloom responded to me. Its arcs grew cleaner when I leaned close, fractured when I doubted. I shook my head in disbelief. Feedback loops, bias, madness in pixels. But my chest told another story. My heart rang with its rhythm. I wrote one last note in the mess of paper. Bloom visible. Registers impossible. Intent undeniable. My handwriting sagged at the edges, graphite shadows pressing into skin. My phone sat beside me, mocking in silence. He still hadn't called back. I tapped the casing once, quick drum against glass. hoping he'd respond before the next cycle of fear dragged me under. The cursor blinked against the foyer, archived like it knew what I was searching for before I typed it. I sat hunched in a chair gone stiff with use, lamp angled sharp to the keyboard. My hands felt detached, moving on autopilot, sifting links through government portals, declassified indexes, bland cover sheets stamped with tired disclaimers. Most documents were dry, numbers chained to numbers, frequencies logged without note. But after 2 hours, one phrase rose like a nail from rotten wood. I froze. Domestic anomalies, unaccounted narrowband bursts. The words chilled me, not for their ambiguity, but their precision. My breath stalled, chest clamping tight. They could have been describing the signal directly, almost verbatim to the way it lodged itself in my ears these past nights. 3 beats, pause. Filed away as anomaly. Curiosity replaced by official dismissal. Sunspots, atmospheric ducting, tropospheric scatter, all the excuses old engineers pull out when something doesn't match the handbook. But here, on the page, was acknowledgement. Not folklore from message boards. Not paranoia scraped from greenlit forums. A dated government record confirming the phenomena. I scrolled deeper through the file. A faint knot wound itself in my stomach the further down my eyes dragged. Coordinates. Plane numbers. Line after line, trailing across the desert southwest. I pulled up a map tab, dropped them in one by one. Crosshairs settled over Nevada scrubland, empty but marked once by cum structures. Old relay towers mothballed in the late 80s, left to rust under pink skies and wind-scoured flats. My heart jolted when one string, almost throwaway, landed right outside Pahrump. Exactly where Art Bell broadcast year after year. The room grew claustrophobic under the lamp's glow. I printed the pages, one at a time, the machine whining low as each sheet slid out. I highlighted the phrases, my hand trembling. Bright yellow slashes across thick ink, as if yelling the words louder would make them believe me. The paper felt heavy in my grip, heavier than its weight should allow. Dense with buried acknowledgement. My notebook lay beside the pile, already scarred with pencil glyphs from the pulse. I flipped to a clean page and copied the coordinates down as well. As if the act of rewriting made them mine, sleep never came. The documents sprawled across my desk like scattered bones. The more I stared, the more it felt like they'd been waiting here all along. Archived just deep enough to discourage curiosity. Shallow enough to ensure someone eventually tripped on them. My mind chased itself in circles. Were they left behind as accident, or as a kind of dare? I tried convincing myself it was bureaucratic negligence, nothing more. But the entries used language too careful, too exact. Unaccounted bursts. Nobody in government files unaccounted, unless they want the absence-marked .hours collapse silently. When dawn pressed pale light through the wet window, I startled at the shrill buzz of my phone. My friend's name appeared on screen. I answered, voice dry from disuse. His tone came low, unsteady. He had listened to the clip I left, replayed until it burrowed under his skin. "That wasn't bleed," he said. I waited out the pause, listening to faint static hiss along the line. Whether his end or mine, I couldn't tell. He cleared his throat, hesitant. "You're not making this up. Send me the file." His words lodged cold. Proof was no longer mine alone, carried like a private ghost. Now it had stepped into someone else's life, uninvited. My printer hummed one last time as I prepared to scan and send. As the machine dragged the page in, the pulse returned, faint but steady, rippling inside the walls like the house was breathing. Each sheet seemed heavier than the printer could carry, weighted with more than ink. With more than history. The rain came back heavier, sheets striking glass as though the night itself was impatient. I set the microphone by the window, levels armed, stream open to my friend on the other side. I wanted him to hear the pulse in real time, not a clipped replay. The air was thick, carrying the smell of wet streets, electricity prickling faint on my skin. At first the feed was steady low hum, threading beneath the rain's cadence. Familiar enough that I almost relaxed. But then it shifted. The hum sharpened into tones, piercing. Notes ruptured through, not background but intrusion. I leaned into the screen, watching levels spike in unexpected intervals. My friend's voice came through low, unsettled. We both listened as one clear tone cut across, then fractured, then cut again, as if trying to form syllables but never finishing them. I swallowed against dryness. At exactly 17 minutes past the hour, the drone doubled. Not random. A doubled rhythm, pressing faster, answering some clock neither of us could see. The rain outside thickened, smearing into a hiss impossible to separate from static. My ribs thudded with it. I looked at the display. He muttered, "That's not just bleed." I wanted to respond, but something else interrupted. His words snapped mid-sentence, like slices missing from a reel. Gone between consonant and vowel. The cut was so clean it felt mechanical. He froze too. His face leaned close to his screen, eyebrows pinched. We understood the same thing at the same second. The system wasn't passive. It wasn't steady background noise we'd tapped into. It was responding. Our watching it, charting it, amplifying had pulled its focus toward us. My body rippled with a cold that came from the inside out. I turned down the gain, hoping to force the tone into silence. But the pulse doubled once more, regardless of my adjustment, as if mocking control. My phone buzzed with small alerts, even though I hadn't shared the link beyond him. Anonymous drops, names blank, joining the stream. I stared at them, frozen text windows blinking, then vanishing before words appeared. I told myself it was bot traffic. I knew it wasn't. The rain seemed to press harder with each joined view, rattling the window as if in delight. My chair groaned as I shifted weight, hands clammy across my desk. My friend's voice returned faint, sharper than before. "You can't keep it online. Shut it down." He sounded closer to panic than I'd ever heard. He was a man who spent his career listening for the difference between faulty gear and noise. If he thought panic was warranted, I couldn't argue. With a twist, I killed the stream. The silence that bloomed after made me grip the desk. Somehow heavier than the tones themselves, as though cutting them made them crawl deeper into the room. I wanted to rip the mic free, but forced myself to wait. He exhaled hard through the line, like he'd been holding his breath. Then his words came, unsteady, urgent. "We need calibrated gear. Not this setup. Meet me, in person. No more blind poking." His voice stuttered again, clipped between words, not by poor connection, but by that same surgical removal. Shivers tracked the length of my back, fast and prickled. The cut wasn't random. The signal had carved into his voice, cutting syllables before they reached me, like an edit done in real time. It felt like we weren't testing it anymore. It was testing us. I pushed back from the desk, pacing the small square of floor as rain whipped against the screen beside me. Conspiracy had always lived at a distance, a topic for late-night calls, fringe lore, campfire static. But now those stories dragged themselves into my room, into him, into us. Theories weren't theories anymore. They had become notes. Field notes. Documentation of something real. Proof of an interaction, not imagination. Every drop of rain outside caught in rhythm with the doubled pulse. Driving steady against glass, I told him I wasn't sure, that maybe we had already gone too far. But his instruction came fast. "Tomorrow. Meet me." The clipped silence after carried the same dread as a voice breaking off mid-sentence on a tape. I hesitated for a breath too long, staring at the dead stream window, before I answered that I'd come. The truth is, the decision wasn't mine anymore. Something wanted to be heard. Something knew I was listening. He showed up late, shoulders hunched against the storm, hauling a canvas bag that had seen better years. He didn't knock first. He stepped inside like a man already expecting trouble, eyes darting over the clutter I'd left scattered on the desk. Out came the gear, a battered oscilloscope with missing knobs, wires coiled in loops, probes and patch cords, tangled like veins. He set it down hard, sighing through his nose, muttering that my setup was a disaster. I didn't argue. My space wasn't meant for lab work. It was meant for memory, for listening. Tonight it was both. We cleared room on the table, sliding old tapes to the floor, careful not to jolt the loops I'd left queued up. He snapped cables into place, hands steady from years of repetition. Once, long ago, he'd sat in repair shops chasing faint rattles in consumer gear. He told me then that most problems came from users, poor grounding, crossed wires, settings misunderstood. He never trusted reports of strangeness. The air about him tonight, though, carried less dismissal, more resignation. He dug deeper into his bag and pulled out a thin notebook, blue cover curled with wear. He laid it between us, thumb flipping through pages inked with quick shorthand. Notes compressed into sound codes, ticks and circles, words cut down to fragments only he understood. He tapped the pages one by one, muttering as he compared, then placed my notebook beside his. The patterns were there, undeniable even without his gloss. My graphite scratches of beaten paws were crude, sketched over sleepless nights. His marks, decades older, were neat, brisk, professional. Yet the same rhythm bled across both. 3 pulses, pause, 3 again. He slid the notebook closer to me, tighter in his palms now, like he regretted showing me at all. "This isn't new," he said flat. His voice broke the room's stale quiet. "Not a glitch. Not recent. I logged this cycle in 95, 96. We passed complaints higher up, but they wrote it off. Customer error. Always customer error." The words left the air heavier than before. I pressed the tape to play, letting the pulse creep back under Art's steady voice. He frowned, scribbling alignment notes, setting levels low, twisting dials across the oscilloscope. The screen came alive, wavy green light crawling into view. He muttered again, same beat. Same profile. Too precise. He started to argue with me about gain settings, worrying I'd blow input if I kept pushing it hot. I snapped back without thinking, voice taut with sleepless obsession. We circled the same point. Volume risks distortion, but low values bury detailed dot while the argument frayed. The needle on the scope jolted, flinched so violently it hit edge. We both froze. The noise didn't explain it. Feedback didn't behave like that. For half a second, the pulse lurched into jagged spikes, then the line collapsed. Dead flat, a horizontal scar across glowing glass. My chest tightened. He reached quick for the power bar, certain a breaker had tripped, but light stayed alive. The laptop's fan still spun. The deck reels still turned their slow loop. Power remained steady. Only the scope betrayed itself, alive but unwilling to move. Neither of us spoke. The silence pressed until it nearly cracked. He tapped the screen. Nothing. Flatline. He turned knobs. Rewired channels. Checked battery backup. Nothing. The line sat motionless. A refusal. My pulse hammered against it like mocking echo. His hands trembled as he shoved the probes back into the bag, almost tearing the wires in his rush. The notebook he stuffed last, pressing it so deep into the canvas it vanished between folds. His eyes found mine, held me hard enough that I forgot to breathe. His mouth grim, jaw locked. "You found something," he said finally. Not amazement, not pride. Warning. His words edged sharp with dread. Something that doesn't like attention. The fan whined. The tape hissed. But the scope stayed flat, and I sat locked in his stare, hearing silence as if it were alive. I kept the line open longer than I should have. The stream humming lev just past midnight while rain ticked steady against the window. It was meant as another test, no more dramatic than calibrating a mic. My friend was listening, shoulders tense in his own window square. A handful of late-night lurkers had joined, numbers hovering at the bottom of the feed. Nothing had changed for a while, just the faint pulse threading through. 3 beats, pause, then 3 again. Familiar enough now that my nerves had dulled. Until a new line blinked on the log. Someone else had dialed in. No username. No origin. Just signal. Then silence. At first I thought it was an error, another ghost connection. But then the breathing began. Not random, controlled. In, out, each cycle wrapped exactly around the pulse. Measured, steady, metronome breath. Every rise sensed with the static I'd learned like a heartbeat. Every fall timed to its absence. My chest locked tight as I counted. It wasn't chance. Whoever this was, they were pacing themselves to it like they'd rehearsed. The chat flickered alive below. 14 watchers pressing comments hard and fast. Who is that? Is this staged? Breaths in sync. Each line scrolled relentless, disbelief turning fast into fear. My friend's face tensed, jaw stiff enough to crack. I muttered that it might be prank bleeding through, but the words landed thin. The breathing continued, louder now, like the caller knew the mic was closer than it was. Each breath pulled at me, hypnotic, exact. I moved to speak, to ask who they were. My mouth dried out before the first word escaped. Then, without warning, the whole screen cut. My friend had stood and yanked the Ethernet, killing every feed. The caller blinked from existence. The comments froze, mid-scroll. My room returned to silence so complete it pressed against my ears like a vacuum. I swallowed thick, realizing my heart was the only rhythm left beating. My friend's voice broke through the phone line a second later. Grounded, but wrapped tight in urgency. Don't put that online again. Do you understand? If you treat this like content, like archive fodder, you'll attract the wrong kind of interest. The phrase stuck to me. Wrong kind. Like he wasn't only afraid of the phenomenon, but people too. People already circling closer. I sat back, staring at the empty feed, feeling foolish. Until the emails came. A single ping rattled the desk, then another, then another. I opened the inbox, pulse riding higher with each new alert. 17 unread, then 20, then 30. Every one stamped with blank subject lines. Every one with no sender. I clicked open one file. Nothing. Empty body. No words, no images. Just airmailed across copper wires. I thought of spam, but spam has pattern. Spoofed headers, lazy links, broken code fragments. This was intentional emptiness, precisely made. Each one a shell without filler, carried like vessels toward me. Attachments tagged along too. Tiny files named with no letters at all, only long strings of space. I downloaded one before I could stop myself. It carried nothing visible, but when I ran properties, the timestamps disturbed me. All marked exactly with the same second. Each blank attachment had been created at once, like they'd been waiting as a set, nudged off some shelf. I rubbed my eyes, forcing them open against exhaustion. The silence in the room felt worse than the breathing had. At least then, the danger sounded like something alive. Now it lived behind the screen, invisible but brushing close. I wanted to throw the router switch and leave the night sealed away. Instead, I leaned forward, replaying in my head the sound of the measured breaths. The way it had curled around the pulse like sheet music. It hadn't been an arrival. It had been continuation. Someone already knew the language I was only learning. My friend called back, voice strained. He repeated, "Don't engage, don't answer." His words shook, rare for him. I assured him I'd back off, I'd sleep. But even as I spoke, I opened another empty mail. The scroll of white taunted me, brighter than the lamp. I thought about the fragments accumulating, tapes scarred, shapes blooming on spectrograms, coordinates buried in FOIA crumbs. Now this, nothing connects outright, but every new piece hisses against the last like wires sparking. I realized that's why I couldn't step away. It felt less like searching, and more like being guided. I closed the window, rain still heavy beyond the glass. Breath fogged the cold pain when I leaned against it, pulse matching too tight against memory. The caller's rhythm replayed anyway, steady, circular, endless. Whether it was intrusion or lure, I couldn't say. Each fragment so far had pretended at randomness, but together, step by step, they were arranging themselves into a map. And I had stepped right into it. The coordinates circled in yellow stared back at me all night until I couldn't stand sitting anymore. By dawn, we were in his car, trunk heavy with recorders, spools of cable, the wounded oscilloscope, and my battered tapes. The storm had followed us, dragging veils of water across the highway, smearing the desert until the mesquite blurred into streaks. The miles ran long and empty. Every sign felt like a relic, pointing not to towns but to silence. He kept his eyes forward, knuckles white where they curled around the wheel. I watched the rain and tried not to see patterns in it. We tuned his dashboard radio to dead air, dial spinning until each increment hissed weightless. At first, there was nothing. Then, as we pushed deeper into Nevada scrub, something shifted. The faint pulse rose again through the static, threading itself not as interruption, but as backbone. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. He didn't look at me, but I knew he heard it too. Neither of us said anything. The pulse grew sharper, each mile closer, fusing us tighter into its rhythm. Even the wipers seemed to fall into time, clapping back and forth with mechanical precision. The desert opened, a flat expanse gray with storm. The air smelled of ozone and grit. My recorder lay balanced on my knees, reels turning slow as it ate silence. Except it didn't stay silent. Bursts came through in faint voices, cracks of speech that weren't ours. A whisper here, a laugh there, a question blurred into question marks. Each time we replayed the tape, the fragments were gone, erased by their own absence. I scribbled notes with desperation, as if graphite could preserve what tape refused to admit. He muttered that the machine wasn't broken. It was refusing. We pulled off the road where the coordinates pointed, tires slipping muddy on tracks barely fit for driving. Through the glass, the tower tilted against slate sky, broken crowns spearing stormlight. Official records said it had gone down in '87, stripped of power and abandoned to sand. Yet one look was enough to know it wasn't dead. Wires dangled like veins from a body still twitching. Rain gathered along the chain link fence, dripping into mud that hissed faintly each time it touched metal. My scalp prickled tight. The pulse was no longer faint. It thudded at my ribs like a second heart. We cut the engine. The car shook under another wave of wind. I hit record again and held the mic against the glass, afraid to open the door. The static surged, swift and violent. Out of its rise came words sharp enough to wound. More than fragments this time, full phrases curling from air on no station. We never left. You are late. The voices vanished before the reels circled back. On playback, all that remained was the pulse and my own shallow breath. The tape itself refused witness. He motioned toward the gate. His lips moved, but the wind tore away his words. We stepped into rain that hammered like gravel from the sky. My shoes sank deep into the wet ground as we neared the fence. The closer I came, the louder the world became. Static screamed out of the recorder as though it wanted to break the reels apart. My hand shook hard, but I didn't pull away. The tower loomed, skeletal but alive, an organ rusting under clouds yet still playing. I pressed my palm against the chain link. It stung, like live current bleeding through weak veins of metal, just enough to warn, not enough to stop. I pulled back fast, shaking my hand. He stared at me, eyes chromed with fear he didn't bother hiding. His gear pressed against his chest, his notebook zipped inside the bag but visible, as though it wanted to leap out. I looked past him, through the fence. Wires swayed and sang faint, joining the storm's roll. Rain funneled down tower legs like tears. Each echo doubled in the recorder, stronger, sharper dot at that line of fence. We didn't need theory anymore. It wasn't pulse behind voice or rumor bled from forums. This was the source. The transmitter wasn't dead. It was awake, humming louder the longer we lingered. Each second swelled the static until I thought it might break skin. When the next crack of thunder crashed overhead, it carried not only sound but signal, a shriek buried in white noise that clawed at my bones. My friend dropped his bag, equipment spilling wet into mud. He looked at me with the same thought etched clear. Whatever this was, we had found it. The tower leaned against the storm like a body refusing to fall, each rusted joint groaning in the wind. Up close, the structure looked less like a machine and more like a tree hollowed by decades, copper vines dangling from its broken crown. The padlocked gate was orange with decay, panels eaten through until the steel itself looked diseased. My friend set his bag down, pulling out sensors one at a time. He clipped them against fence posts, wires running crooked into a small reader. The screen stuttered with surges. Every 3 seconds, pulses bloomed and died, as if the earth itself was breathing. He muttered angry numbers to himself, scribbling notes only he could follow. I kept my eyes on the tower, afraid that turning away might reset it, might hide what we had come so far to see. The rain smacked across us, cold as knives, but my palms burned hot around the recorder. Its reels were already turning, hungry for what lay beyond. He crouched, lifted the rust-thick padlock, twisted, and gave a short, decisive shake of his head. Then he snapped the lock with bolt cutters pulled from the bag. It fell quick to mud, ceremonial more than criminal. We stepped inside, boots crunching gravel swallowed by weeds. Fence wire slumped behind us, sealing the storm out, but trapping something else within. The static rose sharp, biting the air the moment we crossed. My head bowed without my control, bending toward the pulse, as if magnetized. The tower's ribs whistled faint, metal song answering the rhythm. We walked fast to hide our nerves, shadows long and fractured under the stammer of lightning. And then the impossible happened. Voices, familiar, unmistakable, washing through the pulse in harsh overlaps. Art's cadence drifted above static, call lines patched in, but no episode carried these words. The questions asked were ones never taped, and the answers he gave were to callers that never existed. I knew those archives as well as I knew my own breath. These weren't real. They were built out of fragments, spliced from shows into new conversations. Impossible conversations, airing now from a tower marked dead 30 years back. Blood roared behind my ears as I lifted the recorder and pressed it tight against my chest. I captured everything, mouth dry, pen clenched in my teeth as I tried to write and record together. Every minute pulled harder, my pulse hammering to keep pace with the signal's beat. The longer we stood, the clearer the voices became, phrases stitching into coherence. Coast to coast AM, unmistakable, but not bound by history. As though the tower was weaving memory out of half-truths and discards. Pushing them through the storm for another audience stopped my friend's face locked stiff, eyes wider than I wanted to see. He pointed to the tower's midsection, cables dragging like intestines. The surges spiked so high his reader froze, then blinked back alive. He shouted numbers that meant little to me, but more to his fear. I scanned back through the tape, frantic. Each replay shifted the words slightly, as if the archive remade itself fresh just for me. No single cut remained exactly the same. The recording was alive, rewriting beneath my fingertips. "Stop," he said loud, flat as a gavel strike. "It's not broadcasting. It's playing memory. His tone held no room for doubt. Lightning cracked overhead, and the voices fell quiet in its wake, leaving only rain and surge. My chest ached as if something had been caught deep inside and wrenched out. I heard his words again, remembered sharper. Not broadcasting, but playing. Playing memory. I stared hard into green static dancing the recorder screen, every pulse a restless heartbeat. I understood his words, but they unlocked more questions than they closed. I swallowed, though my throat felt raw. Whose memory? I asked it half out loud, half in breath. The storm didn't answer, but the pulse kept steady, feeding the silence as if that itself was reply. We didn't sleep. The storm rinsed dust from the tower while we sat hunched over borrowed gear. Damp notebooks spread wide on the motel table. Hours of tape spooled across reels, hiss stacked on hiss until my ears burned with fatigue. I cross-checked every clip against official recordings, the kind I'd hoarded for half a life. At first glance, they sounded the same. Art's cadence firm, his weight behind each word, the quiet patience of a man listening to impossible testimony. But the timelines didn't fit. Callers spoke questions no record held, and Art answered them without stumble. Dialogues that never happened played themselves into being. I leaned closer to the screen, spectrum analysis blooming waves into color. Between spikes of static, threads aligned with segments I knew as well as breath. But a beat later, the dialogue twisted into lines that scrambled the record. Not distortion, not bleed. These were composites, stitched with too much precision to be accident. The tower wasn't replaying. It was authoring. Furniture cobbled from the bones of memory. I shivered as one scene came through. A caller voicing fear of lights underground, yet the voice stuttered, then morphed into a cadence repeated from a different show 3 years apart. Perfectly integrated. They were constructing ghosts. My friend leaned behind me, headset balanced half off. His pencil tapped restless against his notebook. "This isn't replay," he muttered. "It's building." The words sat heavy, undeniable. My stomach rolled with sour dread. If it was building, then someone or something directed the construction. What purpose did you serve, stitching half-formed dialogues with a talk host dead for decades? I pressed record anyway, though my chest hammered, because proof mattered now more than safety. Hours fell into themselves as I documented this spectral programming. Tapes filled with voices that existed nowhere in the archive, voices pretending to belong. And then everything tipped. Without warning or gradual rise, the transmissions lashed sharp. The volume spiked, clipping through meters until red lights screamed across the deck. My headphones seared with distortion, hot needles grinding against my skull. I yanked them loose, but the sound continued, filling the tiny room, vibrations rattling wires against plastic shells. The tower wasn't broadcasting blind. It had felt us watching, and the bloom retaliated like a flare gun fired into our eyes. My friends scrambled for cables, trying to cut the feed. Smoke curled faint from the equipment, crawling thin across the desk, bitter with melted plastic. We staggered back as motors ground on empty tape, reels snapping to a halt under pressure they couldn't bear. My hands shook useless as I pawed at buttons, powerless now. The signal pulsed louder through air alone, no medium needed. 3 beats, pause. Then it smeared sharp, doubled quick, forced deeper than hearing. My chest quaked, every bone feeling the rhythm. My friend swore under his breath and pulled the cord from the wall, sparks popping as power drained. The hum subsided, falling flat into silence that left only rain scratching weak against the glass. I breathed hard, sweat slick along my palms. The meter needles hung limply, black, lifeless. My friend slumped into the chair beside, notebook forgotten. His face was pale, jaw clenched so tight it warped his words. "That wasn't bleed," he said, his thin in his throat. "That was direction." Direction. The word hollowed me. Not accident. Not interference. It had turned itself toward us, flaring bright because our instruments had crossed into its path. And in the silence that followed, I felt skin crawl with new certainty. We had been seen. I dialed the number twice before I let it ring. He had asked for no names, no caller ID, nothing traceable beyond a mute line. The man had once worked the edges of radio law, walking between engineers and investigators, FCC patchman for decades. Now retired, silenced by choice or pressure. When his voice arrived, it was scratchy, old but direct. I explained what I'd found. He said nothing at first. I thought the line had died until I heard him sigh, slow and heavy, like laying a weight back on a shelf. "We knew about anomalies," he said finally. His tone carried no surprise, only fatigue. But orders were always to stand down. The words twisted in my gut. He spoke like nothing I described needed proof. Anomalies were expected, known, already cataloged into silence. He explained no reports ever traveled far. Logs taken, files removed, always phrased as security. He coughed, dry and nervous, then slipped into half-muttering. Anyone who documented too much had their work collected. Confiscated, some encouraged to retire early. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles whitened. I pushed for detail, asked if this matched towers marked decommissioned. He coughed again, sharper this time. "Don't push," he warned. The voice shrank to a whisper, brittle at the edges. "You won't erase what you've heard, but they will. Don't leave it where they can find it." Then silence. He ended the call without goodbye. Only the pulse of a hollow dial tone remained. I leaned back from the desk, chest hollow. My hand still shook when I opened my laptop. The inbox blinked alive, then blinked empty. Folders once fat with decades of files vanished in a breath. Notes, recordings, archives all gone like they had never lived there. I scrambled, refreshing again and again, but each time the screen answered only with hollow directories. My throat dried to dust. I dragged open drawers, pulling out paper copies I had kept like talismans. Notebooks inked with careful graphs, coordinates circled, dates underlined. Pages now suddenly weightier, more valuable than their flimsy coils allowed. They were what the machine couldn't reach, proof that remained when digital ghosts collapsed. I spread them wide across the table, shaking as I pressed my palms against them, as though contact alone could anchor them here. My friend arrived quiet, eyes flicking toward the printer, toward the stacks. He took in my state without comment. After a pause, he said flat, "This is the moment to stop." His tone was even but heavy, the kind of heaviness born from someone who has watched others vanish into pursuits like this. He said we had enough to prove anomaly, enough to file story or report. That pushing further would only open doors that close harder, but I couldn't hear him. Grief rose faster than argument, swollen from years of rot. My brother's voice slipped into the room as memory, dragging behind it every night spent at static-filled radios after he passed. Back then, I swore I heard him, laughter tucked deep into frequencies no one else caught. They said I dreamed it, that grief dressed itself as echo. Now I knew better. These towers, these pulses, these stitched ghost conversations, they made space for voices buried under noise. They gave them stage again. This wasn't theorizing anymore. This wasn't research into anomaly. It was reclamation. A path clawed out of interference towards something I had already touched once, something I ached to reach again. My brother alive, if only in fragments, if only in static. I pressed my hand against the paper, breath hot with sudden clarity. Stopping now didn't just mean safety. It meant surrendering the single proof that mattered most. We carried the new gear into the room like priests ferrying relics, careful with each case, each latch. My friend had procured shielded cables, ferrite cores, scrubbers built to smother interference before it reached the recorders. The laptop stood fresh, wiped clean, every port taped until ready. It was overkill, he said, but necessary. The signal would have to fight harder. We wanted a clean sample. Just one unbroken piece of proof, untouched by corruption. We worked late. Rain duller tonight. A background whisper instead of war drum. My hands moved quick and precise. Practice from sleepless nights. His hands, slower, deliberate. Fixing each connection twice. Tracing the line bare with suspicion. Once everything hummed alive, we synchronized clocks, drained breaths, pressed record. The silence stretched before it answered. At first, only faint static. He nodded, muttering this was good, ordinary. We leaned closer. Then the pulse re-emerged, steady, proud. The laptops held it without distortion, spectrograms plotting perfect arcs. A bloom unfolding clean for the first time. Relief surged, a knot loosening in my chest. I smiled despite myself, lifting my eyes from the screen. He did not smile. His jaw clenched harder as he adjusted gain with stiff fingers. Then the bloom twisted. Our screens froze, lines tearing sideways across spectrum, pixels rearranged into shapes no code displayed. The pulse blurred, then sharpened again. Suddenly, the waveforms folded into jagged laughter. No words, no voices, only laughter on loop, each burst timed to our last keystroke. The clips didn't overwrite themselves once. They rewrote constantly, bending into more grotesque echoes. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't failing. It was adapting. We slammed lids shut. His curse tore into the air as sparks licked one laptop's port. Fans whined into shrieks before crowning silence. The recorders died. The gears slumped into corpses, wires twitching in their sockets. The laughter lingered a few moments longer, embedded somehow in the small space, then thinned to nothing. My throat ached from air too dry. Sweat rolled down my cheek. He sat hard against the wall, shoulders pressed tight, eyes refusing to meet mine. "It's reacting," he said softly. "Each shield we add, each filter it adapts. Wants chaos when we force order." His fingertips hovered over his notebook but didn't write. His hand trembled like he feared documenting now. I stared at the dark laptops, lids sealed like coffins. The room hushed but not quiet. Somewhere just beneath hearing, I swore the pulse ran on, mocking. My faith cracked. This was supposed to be the night of proof. Clean cut, irrefutable. But the system had beaten us, twisted ahead, outpaced us. We were tools for its message, not masters. And for a stretched instant, I considered letting go. But then it came back. Memory of a night years ago, alone at the same window, when static turned into my brother's laugh. Clear, real, and possible. Everyone dismissed it as grief-twisting signal. But I had heard him. And if I had once, then I could again. My chest seared with it now, sharper than failure, louder than my friend's warning silence. I didn't care about adaptation or corruption. I wanted one file, one moment unspoiled that proved he reached out beyond silence. The room darkened with our dead gear. He rose, packed his case slower than ever before, his eyes hollow. He muttered not to continue, but didn't argue beyond that. It was as if his words had collapsed too. When he left, the door's click broke the room into halves, the silent world outside, and me with the pulse inside. I sat surrounded by graves of circuitry, metal stinking with heat that no longer lived. Lights off, window opened a thin drizzle. I swallowed the fear with one conviction. The machines may collapse. The laughter may seek to drive me back. But I would remain. I would keep listening. I couldn't leave the corrupted files closed. Their blank icons glared at me from the screen, daring me to forget, daring me to act sane. The laptops were still useless, fans burned out, ports blackened, but I had the older decks. Machines older than me, analog beasts with spools and belts, heavy in the hand, immune to the tricks of code. I slid one file onto magnetic tape, forced playback through heads that had survived forgotten basements and pawn shop neglect. The reels turned hesitant, dragging the silence out like it was reluctant to give anything back. At first, the laughter came, jagged and broken like before, but only for a moment. Then the shape bent strangely, file decoding itself in a way no program had managed. Words pressed through hesitation. Voices overlapped, stacked faint against one another. None carried full sentences. Instead, they cascaded in layers of pleading, sobbing through muffled frequencies, throatless calls caught in static. My hands locked to the machine, afraid to stop, afraid to continue. Their cadence tripped over itself, like fractured minds trying to crawl into clarity. Shredded tape glued back by desperate fingers. My stomach rolled as I leaned close. I knew it wasn't equipment error. This was intentional, a shape chosen to emerge only through analog playback. My friend's warning still hung heavy: don't humanize the system. Don't let it bend you. But their broken syllables splintered against me until one phrase rang clean, clear enough to twist breath from my body. Don't forget us. I froze. I rewound, fingers trembling so violently I nearly tore the tape. Again it spilled, layered, uneasy, but present. Don't forget us. The words lodged under my skin like thorns. I played it once, twice, 10 times, nausea rising with each repetition. By the 12th, my body felt lighter than bone, as though the voice lived in me now. Was it real? Projection? Was grief reaching from me into sound? I couldn't separate. My brother's laughter hovered under memory, tangled with these pleas. Against reason, I wanted it to be him, calling from some archive between broadcasts and silence. But the voices overlapped, nameless, countless. It felt wider than one life. An archive of many. That truth crushed me heavier than any single ghost. My friend snapped, telling me to stop, yanking the cord from the wall with more force than needed. The machine fell silent, reels locking mid-turn. My breath staggered with it, shallow and breaking. His eyes bored into me with panic, jaw tight. It's bait, he said, furious. Not memory. Don't put words to it that aren't there. He didn't understand. Couldn't. Once you hear a plea, no matter how broken, you can't unhear it. I shoved his hand away and rewound again, begging the machine back to life. He cursed, but I ignored him. The phrase reappeared, same cadence, same clarity beneath ruin. Don't forget us. My eyes watered as though the voice pressed salt against them. Whether my mind shaped coherence, against void or not, didn't matter. It had spoken directly into me. And that broke something I'd guarded, my logic, my clean distance. This wasn't anomaly anymore. These weren't blips eating circuits. These may have been people, lives crammed into radio bones, leaking down lineages until dug back out. Forgotten souls not wanting to fade. I felt the room spin. Question bloomed until it ate all else. Who placed them here? Who buried them in the first place? And why? The pulse had been a cipher, the laughter, the ghost conversations, breadcrumbs scattered not for error, but for reach. My hand clutched the notebook, so tight it bent. I knew then this wasn't about careful study anymore. It was about answer. And I was ready to chase it anywhere, even if it meant I'd be swallowed whole. The first reports came quiet, tucked into fringe forums like background noise. A police scanner hobbyist insisting he caught the pulse behind dispatch chatter. A parent claiming her baby monitor clicked in sequences of 3. Amateur drivers hearing rhythmic beats on traffic radios, same pause, same return. I thought coincidence, until the posts multiplied. Each described the cadence I kept locked in my own notebooks. 3, pause 3. The rhythm had left the desert. It had found new hosts. I cross-checked times, sketching frantic lines across line paper. Each event landed within seconds of each other, no matter the device, no matter the town. Synchronization at that scale isn't bleed. It's design. My friend leaned over my shoulder, brows furrowed, muttering that parallel drift was impossible. and yet there it was. The charts glared at us, neat rows mapping across cities, suburbs, empty fields. My stomach pinned itself tighter with each match. Local news caught wind, but killed it with dismissal. A quick filler segment, a curious glitch, no harm meant. They blamed weather, blamed old infrastructure. Routine interference, they called it, smiling off camera. But in the comments, lines poured like water beneath a locked door. People describing what they had heard, attaching shaky recordings from phones, videos jittering of baby monitors caught mid-pulse. Some confused, some shaken, others certain it was familiar though they couldn't say why. The station never ran an update, but silence didn't tame recognition. Beneath that thread, a quiet chorus formed. I played clip after clip on my machine, writing times with pencil pressed so hard it nearly tore paper. The waveforms laid identical to mine, arc for arc, spaced to the second. As though one finger tapped every signal source together, indifferent to the gear it bent. They were unified. Broadcasts belonged to them now, radios just shells to carry rhythm further and further. The desert tower wasn't trap, it was seed. My friend's patience cracked that night. He gripped the edge of my table, hard enough wood squealed. His eyes bore down like condemnation. It's spreading. That means stop. Shut it out before it eats wider. His tone rode edge of fear, but sharper, protective, the way someone warns a person leaning too close to fire. He wanted us to retreat, pack away every deck, smash tapes before weight pressed on us deeper. His hands shook that same way I'd once seen them soldier through coil repairs. Fury laced with exhaustion, but all I could hear was the phrase left by the fractured voices. Don't forget us. Whether real or phantom, once it lived in me, I couldn't ignore it. Erasing now wasn't protection. It was betrayal. I imagined others bending ears to static, hearing fragments that carried their own lost faces. If the pattern spread and no one marked it, then every memory buried into it would die again, this time suffocated into incomprehension. I told him I couldn't walk away. He cursed, turned his face aside, jaw muscle twitching like it might break. He muttered that obsession could cloak itself as duty, but I wasn't listening. My eyes clung to waveforms, each clean mark identical no matter whose device caught it, no matter the distance. This was no longer small enough to conceal. The widening had begun. The room grew darker with each clip I saved, each line drawn. Silence thick around us, though in it I swore pulsing followed, soft as if the very plaster of the walls carried rhythm. My fingers twitched over the keyboard, nails biting ridges harder than intended. The mountain of proof swelled before me and replaced caution with compulsion. Containment wasn't possible. Dissemination was all the system wanted. All I could do was follow further, pull map threads taut until I knew how far it could reach. My friend stepped back toward the door, saying he'd had enough. I stayed anchored, eyes red, chest too tight, mouth whispering into air I no longer trusted. If the voices demanded not to be forgotten, then I wouldn't let them vanish into comfortable silence. I wrote that into my notebook last, graphite thick and final, while the pulse ticked on steady in my bones. The storm crawled in from the horizon long before the first crack of thunder. I could feel it in the grit of the air, the rise of my hair, the taste of iron at the back of my tongue. The desert tower bent into the wind like it had waited years for such a night. My friend cursed, boots sinking damp into the sand, while we hauled out gear already scarred from too many trials. The first raindrops fell heavy and far apart, like scouts of a greater army, striking the reels and casing with hollow THUDS. By the time the storm broke open, we were buried in it. Sheets of rain drove sideways, hammering the tower until its frame groaned. Lightning speared above, bleached white against black sky, every strike burning the after image of the skeleton tower into my eyes. The signal leapt like it had been waiting, loud as breath at my ear. The pulse tripled, no longer 3 followed by pause, but flowering outward across spectrum. The meters on the deck glowed red, needles straining too far right. A bloom unfurled, petal after petal, until channels filled with phrases that weren't fragments anymore. Entire conversations surged into being. Words rolled, not broken now, but fluid, carrying the grain of voices half remembered from nights of broadcast 2 decades gone. Calls I knew, topics I remembered, except twisted. Familiar questions veered into answers that had never been given. Phrases polished too clean to be coincidence. Each one shivered against me with weight. My friend gripped cables in panic, muttering about overloads, his hand ready to cut them free before fire ripped through the lines. Sparks did rise from one port, popping sharp into rain, but I held my recorder firm, reels spinning wild into red line. The storm fed it. Every strike above charged the pulse louder, thrusting memory into open sky as though clouds were hungry conduits. This wasn't the signal wounded, cornered. This was it thriving, pouring archive after archive until the desert rang with voices. I heard strangers pleading calm, calling from places that never existed, and through their rush, I swore I heard him. My brother's laugh, brief, sudden, unmistakable. Thin but whole, radiating straight through static, tucked inside a sweep of conversation. My chest cracked like thunder, soaking in impossible joy, holding the headphones tighter until pain split my jaw. I choked his name, half in breath, praying another laugh would follow. My friend panicked harder, screaming through the rush for me to cut it now, cut before it redlined into rupture. But I pushed him back. I needed another second, another spin of the reels, anything. The laugh hung sharp in my ear, echoing until it broke my restraint completely. I let the machine run hot, pursued it harder, chasing memory through scar tissue stitched by signal. The voices layered deeper, a tide impossible to untangle. Pleading, laughing, chanting, confessing, 100 conversations all at once. The tower shuddered with each strike overhead, cables swaying like drowned arms. Rain drummed against casing until it smeared ink across my notebook. But still I clung. I knew if I cut away now, I might never pull him back. And then it happened. The new voice arrived, buried under none, surfacing steady, measured. Not pleading, not begging remembrance. Calm, commanding. A voice carried on the storm, yet untouched by it, breaking the chaos with intent. "Build the door," it said. Words cut clean, not fragmented, not accidental. Clearer than anything else, sliding under my skin like blade. I froze, recorder humming so hot I thought it might ignite in my hands. My friend shoved me hard, pulling at the cord with frantic strength, but the voice lingered still, undeterred. "Build the door." The words cut sharper than thunder. Build the door. Not fractured, not warped, not a trick of interference. They landed whole, spoken with the weight of intention. I froze, pulse flooding my ears louder than the storm. My friend hissed at me to shut everything down, to walk away before the signal wrote itself deeper into us. But I couldn't. The command pinned me like gravity. Each fragment we'd chased, the pulses, the blooms, the laughing corruption, the pleas for remembrance, they all coiled back around this. It wasn't random noise at all. It had been pushing us toward this phrase from the beginning. Build the door. I mouthed the words, half afraid speaking them would confirm some allegiance I hadn't agreed to. My friend caught the motion, eyes wide, lips pressed into a bleak line. He gripped my wrist hard and said this is recruitment, not revelation, that we'd been caught in a feedback loop designed to turn listeners into builders. His tone trembled because fear made more sense than faith. But for me, something opened. I unrolled the notebook and spread the diagrams out across the desk. The waveforms I'd drawn in half frenzy now seemed to rearrange themselves when seen under the light of those words. The arcs and spikes weren't random. They mapped each other like walls, corners, joins. line upon line nested until the bloom resembled not a spectrum but a blueprint. My breath hitched as I traced with my finger. Rooms curved into existence, passageways no house could hold. Sound had been carving spaced out. The thought hit me hard enough that I sat back, pen slack. Each broadcast, each mutation, each corrupted playback, none of it aimed only to haunt. It was instruction, teaching a pattern slow enough that someone obsessive enough would finally piece form from rhythm. I was that someone. The voices weren't just memories, weren't just fragments needing remembrance. They were guides, coercing hands into construction. My friend shoved the paper back at me, desperate. He said we had gone too far, that this was proof enough to walk away forever. His voice broke in places I hadn't heard before, hollow, resigned. But even then, the pull didn't slip. I sketched the bloom tighter, refining waves into solid edges until the page seemed to pulse on its own. In the lines, I found a space impossible in real architecture. A room that bent in curves too sharp for any frame. Spaces that folded onto themselves while still opening wider. A map for something not meant for physical ground. I whispered as I drew, replaying the recording in my head, building syllables into lines on graphs. Build the door. The phrase etched itself deeper than chalk on slate, deeper even than graphite. It was written into me now, a pulse more profound than my own heartbeat. The storm outside had rolled away, but still the windows trembled faint as though unseen vibration pressed their glass. I felt smaller in the quiet, yet more certain than ever. My friend finally shoved his bag against the wall and told me to burn it all, to end it before the signal claimed another voice. But I couldn't. I didn't feel claimed. I felt chosen. And that conviction frightened me almost as much as it steadied me. I wanted to deny the power of suggestion, wanted to call it madness dressed as revelation. Yet when I looked back at the slant of diagrams, at how each waveform aligned together, it seemed inevitable. Everything had come to this. Every night awake at static. Every sheet of graphite notes. Every plea that begged not to be forgotten. The fragments stacked into place, pointing at an assembly larger than us. The voices had not only asked for witness, they had brought blueprints. And my hands, clumsy with exhaustion, shook with the urge to obey. Build the door. The words vibrated in my head like a promise. My friend's face hovered, drowned with fear I couldn't share. He only saw a trap. I saw completion. The signal was asking, and some part of me knew I would never refuse it. We laid the equipment out in the cramped room as though arranging ritual instead of circuitry. The diagrams sprawled across pages told us what to do: oscillators in looping arcs. Outputs curved inward, speakers canted toward a drawn center. Each wire tightened into place felt less like connection and more like oath. My friend handled it with the reluctance of a man building gallows. I with the devotion of someone who could not let go. By the time we finished, the room felt alien to itself, corners skewed by the way the instruments pointed inward. We powered on slowly, one by one, until red diodes cast sickly light against the walls. The system murmured, speakers catching breath. Vibrations seeped into the air, subtle at first. A gentle ripple against glass of water, then heavier, tugging at chest and teeth. Pressure built strange, crawling upward, denser than humidity, as though the room itself prepared to crush us inward. My palms slicked as we checked readings, needles dancing in sync far past tolerance. My friend barked at me to pull voltage down, but I hesitated. This felt like threshold. Then it happened. A bloom opened into the air, not sound, not image, but force deeper than both. The hum fell away, collapsing into something below silence. For a single second, the world held breath. A black blossom expanded across the room, hollow, consuming, darker than the darkness beyond the window. I gasped without oxygen, as if lungs had forgotten how to keep rhythm. My hands hovered frozen, afraid a single movement would shatter it. Just as sudden, the system shrieked to collapse. Sparks screamed from boards, Plastic casings sagged wet with heat. Fuses burst sharp as snapping bones. We lunged backward as coils spat acrid smoke, filling air with melted wire. The bloom fell apart in fragments, leaving only failure behind. My chest hammered, sweat blinding both eyes. I bent double, coughing poison out, fingers raw from the heat. The silence after was worse than the collapse. And yet through blur, I saw movement outside the window black with rain. Not reflection, not lightning. A ripple, like the air had bent or folded along a seam. I jerked toward it, heart spiking with impossible certainty. Something had pushed through for that brief second, half visible, slithering across the pane like shadow-made liquid dot. My friend shouted over the smoke that this was proof to stop, to abandon before walls caved in. His face glistened with sweat and fear, voice taut with need. He wanted me to seal boxes, scatter cords, salt the earth where it had touched us. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. If shadows ripple, then something waited on the other side. I wheezed against the burning air, insisting we had been close, closer than ever. That the bloom wasn't failure but prelude. He cursed, voice breaking between fury and pleading, but I countered every word with conviction. Each shard of melted plastic on the floor burned like breadcrumb, leading us forward. We argued until dawn, the light filtering pale against walls lined with black scorch. We faced each other across the ruin, two silhouettes outlined in wreckage. My hands trembled from exhaustion, my arguments repeating, but I could not admit defeat. The signal's demand hummed beneath every silence, a cold undertone filling the spaces between words. Build the door. I wrote it again on the open page, pen gouging deep enough to tear. The door was real. I had seen its shadow move. I went back through the reels because doubt gnawed harder than exhaustion. I needed to know if what we had heard in the bloom was invention or artifact. The storm's residue still clung to the machines, scorched plastic bitter as charred sugar, but the tapes rolled. One by one, I lined them up, cataloging hours into neat stacks, marking patterns with pencil. At first it was familiar coil of Art Bell's cadence, clipped collars, fragments chopped and restitched. I had grown used to its tricks. Then I froze. Between the voices that didn't belong, another crept in. Mine. It wasn't a simple bleed. I leaned closer, breath trapped in my throat, listening to myself confess things I had never spoken into any mic. My voice, perfect in rhythm and tone, threaded inside composite dialogues as though it had lived there from the start. Lines of worry about my brother. Admissions of fear I'd never allowed out loud. Thoughts voiced as if they had been plucked straight from my skull and laid out as confession. My heart clenched sick as I replayed it again. My own voice pressed deep into a signal older than me. I couldn't move. Was this manipulation? A trick to personalize the lure? Or had the signal reached backward, burrowed into thin memories I'd left unguarded, forging them into broadcast as if to prove ownership? Each replay carved the line thinner. I didn't know if the tape was lying to me, or if I had always been a part of whatever it was. My friend came when I called, but he didn't sit long. I played the reel for him, waiting, hands sweating. He went pale as he heard my voice in places where I swore it had never belonged. He didn't argue the fact. He didn't suggest corruption or digital trick. He only muttered once, "It's curling back," and shut his bag. His silence was worse than denial. He refused another word, gathered what little equipment still worked, and walked. He brushed past me without a backward glance. His retreat told me everything I feared was true. Alone again, I sat by the desk, staring at the rain-slick glass window. The storm had moved on, but water slid thin in sheets, painting reflections across my face. In the silence, I spoke aloud, testing myself. My voice echoed flat. But a second later, the recorder bled back almost the same phrase, bent slightly, as though already folded into static. My own words replayed corrupted, as if the signal couldn't wait to graft me further in. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, trying to separate perception from paranoia. It was useless. Memory against recording, reality against archive. I couldn't draw the line anymore. If my voice existed inside its framework, then truth had eroded. I thought of my brother often, and now those very thoughts spilled back to me through reels like smuggled relics. Were those mine still? Or had the system stolen even grief, absorbing the rawest ache to keep itself fed? The question left me trembling, a sickness I couldn't sweat out. The machines lay in ruin, but the reels spun on, faint ghosts alive in them. I stared at the deck, hearing its low mechanical rumble like a pulse stitched into bone. My friend's warning spiraled in the stillness behind me, but I couldn't let go. The voices had always said not to forget. Now they wanted more. To remember wasn't enough. They needed rewriting, continuation, transformation. They required witness willing to surrender border. Fingers shaking, I slid a blank reel into the deck. My reflection in the steel faceplate looked less like me and more like static beginning to coalesce. I knew the risk. I knew crossing this line meant I might never return to certainty. But there was no resisting the pull now. The signal had already written pieces of me, whether stolen or offered. And I wanted to see where it carried. I pressed the red button. Record. I rebuilt the loop slowly, carefully, hands shaking but steady enough to follow each mark on the diagrams. The room still smelled of burnt plastic from the last attempt, char etched into walls, but I forced myself not to notice. I laid the oscillators in that same crooked arc, wires mapped out like veins, speakers angled in, each one locked and double-checked. Alone this time, no one left to stop me. My mind throbbed with the phrase that had been seared there: build the door. I whispered it as I tightened the last connection, like a key sliding into a locked dot when power surged. The hum rose again. Not faint this time, but immediate, an inhalation that rattled against windows. I didn't flinch. I leaned into it, letting sound press into my chest until it seemed my heartbeat staggered to match. The oscillators sang against one another, finding intervals, converging on something deeper. The speakers moaned, a resonance bigger than the room. My eyes blurred with the pressure, lids quivering. I stared at the black screen of the window in front of me, expecting reflection. Instead, the air itself began to fold. It wasn't imagination. The wall softened, bending inwards like glass under heat. The black outside thickened, bent, pooled into ripples. My throat closed with awe and fear tangled together, every inch of me wanting to step forward and back all at once. Rain faded at the edges of hearing. The steady hiss of storm peeled away, replaced by something else. Layers upon layers of voices rising, not in chaos but in strata, stacked so vast they rang like mountains. Calls, cries, laughs, questions, echoes pulled tight into infinity. The weight of 1,000 conversations beat across me, heavy and endless. I raised the recorder, thumb on red light, capturing each moment. My knuckles burned from gripping too hard. I told myself to hold steady, to document, to anchor. Then, as I leaned forward, something broke. Not the machine, not the cables, something in me. For a heartbeat, warmth folded around my hand. A grip familiar, rough in palm, lighter than memory. My brother's hand. I gasped and nearly dropped the recorder, eyes blurring with tears that stung hot. His touch tightened, pulling me forward into that ripple of blackness, and for one suspended second I believed. The bloom swelled, swallowing silence whole. It was no longer a room. It had become a passage, yawning out past comprehension, pulling me in. The voices roared, infinite, collapsing into me while still expanding outward. I staggered one step deeper, tape reels unraveling to greedily take it all. My chest tore between fear and gratitude. I whispered his name, no louder than breath. Did he answer? None of it mattered. I was there, recording proof that no wall, no grave was final dot. and then it stopped. The recorder slammed dead, mid-breath, the reels halting like a neck broken in an instant. My voice hung cut in half, silence wider and heavier than the bloom itself. I froze, staring at the black wall of nothing, knowing it had vanished but that I had already crossed. When I woke, every machine was dead. The desk was a graveyard, plastic warped, wires curled into blackened veins, dials melted into drooping shapes. The air stank of smoke long cold. My body ached as though I had been thrown against the walls, though I couldn't recall moving. Hours were gone, stripped without record. The clock told one time, my body another. I sat up slow, ears ringing, throat raw, but the room gave no answer. Only silence heavier than any storm that came before. I checked the reels with shaking hands. They spun, obedient, whispering rainfall. Nothing more. Hours of tape capturing rain loops, ordinary water falling against glass, repeating endlessly until distinction bled away. I pressed my ear close to the hiss. My breath steadied when I thought I caught something folded inside, a change in tone, a slight pulse too faint to graph. I rewound again and again, listening until my temples thudded. But each time the reels offered only rainfall, ordinary and absolute. I couldn't stop. For days I stayed in the room. Curtains wet, windows smeared, notebooks damp at their edges. I barely moved, afraid to miss something living tucked beneath the loops. My friend returned eventually, opened the door with no warning. His eyes scanned the ruin, then me, hunched beside black reels. He didn't sit. He asked nothing, only stared until his face folded with alarm. I told him to listen closer. I told him something lived in the hiss if you gave it breath. He shut his eyes, swallowed hard, and left without speaking. His footsteps faded, leaving me deeper inside the quiet. Nights stack without divide. I can't tell if I crossed or not. Maybe that moment when the air folded fully pulled me through. Maybe it didn't. My memory feels rewritten, half-lived and half-planted. Sentences I never said streaming back in my own voice. Sometimes I can't tell which are mine and which belong to the tower. The doubt cuts but also soothes. If I am half gone, then half remains, anchored here to record. I keep cataloging faint blips. Each time the rain loops, I plot shifts, simple rises, valleys, cracks. No frequency map can prove them, but I catalog anyway. Graphs line the walls, more architecture, more rooms not meant for houses. The black window is always there, its surface waiting. At night, it looks less like glass and more like surface tension stretched across some deeper well. I run fingers over the reels, whispering that I understand. Whispers gather in my ears without moving the air. I cannot swear they are separate from me. Maybe I am looped now too. But still, I feel the pull. The signal isn't gone, no matter how silent the house or how blank the files. It hums whenever storm clouds arrive, whenever static bursts across broken radios. I know it lingers, waiting for another listener, another ear greedy enough to stay. The door may not be shut. Or maybe it was never meant to close. Either way, someone must remain here, face angled toward the hiss, holding vigil. Black screen against glass, open, endless. I wait beside it, recording still.